Just shove them in. Take our Tarmogoyf and put them somewhere else.
You're going to make a Tarmogoyf deck and not include Tarmogoyf? Get out of here.
Fail.
Hey, you are watching the MTG Thoughtcast. I'm Joseph, one of your hosts. Over there is John, one of your other hosts. And today we are talking the best pre-con of 2024. It's a huge topic. It's a huge undertaking, but I think we're going to be able to do it pretty well. John, how you feeling about it?
Yeah, let's do it. Hey, it's pre-con. Well, it's not pre-con season, but now it's pre-con season. You know, we're telling you now it's pre-con season. Yeah, are you sick of hearing about pre-constructed decks? Too bad. Now you're here to talk about pre-constructed decks.
Unhinge your jaw. Get ready. So, I mean, we're headed into the holiday season. It's time to buy gifts and to receive gifts. Maybe you have a Christmas list and you're looking for some pre-cons and you're looking to know what the best one is to put on your list. That's what we're talking about. And we're approaching it from a scientific method. That's right. Before we get into all of that, a little bit of upkeeping here. If you want to join in all of the discussion on today's episode, other episodes, you want to play some Magic games with us, hang out with us all the time, you can join our Discord. It's linked down below. It's totally free. We'd love to have you. We love hanging out with everyone there. While you're down there, give us likes, comments, subscribes if you feel so inclined to support the channel. It puts our videos in front of more people, and we love that. And I think you love that too. So if you love that too, just go ahead and do all this stuff. It's really easy.
We love you for loving that.
Exactly, right.
So love us, love you by loving us back.
Exactly. And so John doesn't get mad at me. Shout out to our audio only listeners. We love you. You're valued and supported in your audio only listening. You don't get to see our beautiful faces, which maybe is better. Maybe this is a better experience audio only. Who knows?
You know what kind of trash I am. Don't look
exactly.
at me.
You don't have to worry about our genetics involved in the episode. But let's go ahead and start talking about what the best pre-con of 2024 is. And more importantly, how we came to these conclusions. So we made a spreadsheet, which is one of my favorite hobbies, to rank every single one of the 24 precons that came out this year. Special shout out to the Raining Cats and Dogs deck. We did not include that one in this list because it was a secret layer thing, and there's no new. We'll get to that in a second. So we had a point system for each category that we made. So there's 5 categories, maximum of 10 points per category. So total score maximum is 50 points per deck. John and I each did our individual scores, and then we aggregated them together to make our definitive top 5 list. Those categories are the theme of the deck. What's the deck trying to do? What can you expect going into this? Is the theme strong? Is it a weak theme? That was the scale, 0 to 10 there.
Or especially if it was something unique. That's also that's a very heavy player when it comes to something like this as well, because like that is kind of more than anything is going to really derive, like, is this going to be a pre-con or a deck as a theme? Well, if you want to buy, you know, you could throw the best upgrade potential or reprint value or overall strong characteristics into a deck, but if its overall like gameplay theme isn't something you enjoy playing, then you're obviously not going to have fun playing that deck, you know, regardless how strong people tell you it is.
Exactly. So that's the theme category. Next category is new cards. It's new designs in the deck. What was printed into this deck, into the Commander format, into the Legacy format, from these precons. Is it worth getting these decks for the new cards that are printed in it? Obviously, again, 0 to 10 on the scale there. It's pretty self-explanatory.
For this one as well, equal opportunity amongst every single one of the precons. There was obviously a huge new card variance between the Universes Beyond decks and the standard Magic IP ones as well, because like obviously the Fallout decks were like 80% new cards.
Yeah, it was mostly new cards in those decks.
So there's no, in our scoring sheets, there was no like outweighing one over the other just because the Fallout deck had like 70 new cards in it each.
Exactly.
As compared to like a Murders at Karlov Manor one that only had 10 new cards, you know? So this is equal opportunity amongst every single one of these.
Yep. Which, as we go through this, mentioning that, I haven't really seen like more of one or the other, where it's like, oh, I see all of the new cards from this deck in, you know, regular non-precon Commander games, versus like, oh, I see, you know, there's some of the Fallout decks where I haven't seen any of the individual cards show up in individual games. So it actually was not too hard to not weight that, just because quality is quality, you know? There's just more quantity in the Fallout decks and in the Universes Beyond ones. So that's new cards. That's that category. Moving on from there, this is a category I feel like I need to explain just a bit, but this is the replayability category. I felt like complexity has a bit of a negative connotation, where I wanted to call the category replayability, as in, is the deck super linear? That would be near the 0 end of the scale. Or are you going to find new paths and new strategies every time you play the deck? Are you going to find new paths to victory every time you sit down at the table with this deck? So that's what I would call the replayability of the deck, because that's something that I really look for and I really care about in my Commander decks is, am I going to be able to stay light on my toes and be flexible, find good variance in it? Variance would be another good name for the category, but we went with replayability.
Exactly. Just you know, out of the box as is. And as we roll into this one as well, by the way, this is obviously taking into account of our scores are based on the deck package that you receive out of a box.
Yeah, I'm not talking about upgrades.
Yeah, obviously the replayability of a commander with your own tweaks and modifications is how you see fit. So this is judging every single one of these based on what you are receiving as a package when you purchase it sealed as is. And so, yes, as you described, yeah, if like out of the box, does this strategy or theme or idea that it's trying to do, are you going to want to keep it together as is for several games at a go? This is where replayability comes into play.
Yep. Next category, again, super self-explanatory, is reprint value. How good was the reprint value in the deck? Is it worth the price of admission for the deck list to get that pile of cards? Or is it on the lower end where you could probably build the deck list for cheaper than what the retail price is for the deck? So that's sort of the scale for that one.
I think it's also important to note for this one as well, reprint value, obviously for a monetary standpoint, is a very, very good aspect of this as well. And I don't know if this is something how you did your own scoring as well. But for me, reprint value also is like, do the reprints that are cards. Yeah, are the reprints in this deck, are they here for a good reason, or is it reprint for the sake of a reprint? You know what I mean?
Sure.
So value is determined on two ends of it. Obviously, a great money card is a good money card, but also, are the pieces in this deck something that should belong in this deck? Totally.
Or like you said, is it just a pile of cards that they threw together? So, which that was, you know, we'll talk about some of the Modern Horizons decks, but that was, not to give away too much, but that was how I felt about most of those, was like, well, they just kind of threw these decks together. They don't really have like a cohesive whatever. So that's reprint value. And then the last category is fun, of course. Is this a fun deck to play? Are you going to have fun sitting at the table? I also scored this one a bit of, are your opponents going to have fun playing against this? Is everybody at the table going to be in a more fun position because this deck is sitting at the table?
Yeah, you obviously can't be a determining for every single person you ever encounter when it comes to playing a deck, but generally speaking, determining how well your deck is going to be playing up against other people, that is a very important consideration factor, right? Like this isn't turning into like one of those conversations about how do we do rule 0 nowadays, but like, you know, you roll up with this precon up against other people who are playing precons. Are you and are they going to have a good game experience playing this deck?
For sure. So this was obviously the most subjective, probably equally as subjective as theming. Fun, I would say a bit more though, of how you and I individually felt about each of the decks and the deck lists and the precons.
Yeah, I did notice that category alone, I think, is where we had some of our biggest differences when it came to our score sheets.
Totally. Well, you and I just have different play styles, so there's things that you find fun that I don't find fun, and vice versa.
Exactly. And for anybody interested in this as well, some kind of, I'm sure we'll figure out how to do this as well, but some link of some kind to the spreadsheet you can see for yourselves. We've got a couple different tabs on here as well. You can find my scores, you can find Joseph's scores, and then what we're about to roll into right now, our top 5, excuse me. This will be available in the description of either method you're preferring to watch or listen to this video. I'm sure Joseph will find some way to do that.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. You can check out our sheet. You can check our homework for us. But yeah, so John and I went through and we scored every single one of the precons that came out in 2024 on this scale to get a score from 0 to 50 for each of them. And then we combined our scores together for each of them to get the Thoughtcast official top 5 precons of 2024. Should we just dive straight in and start talking about it?
Sure. So
John,
how about
for
a I was gonna say, how about for a point of reference, do we want to give our bottom and then
100%? Yes.
So as we just described, we Joseph and I both, we made score sheets out of 50 and then combined together into 100. So to set the bar on where we're at, our bottom of the barrel at number 24 with a combined 33 points is Deadly Disguise.
That deck was so bad, man.
Like, it was Morph. It's Morph. It's Face Down. It's Naya. It was the fifth Naya deck in a row. Like,
I need to go and see, what did I rank this one? Where was it for me? This was this Deadly Disguise? That was also the second deck that came out this year. That feels like forever ago.
Yes, it was. It was one.
So out of 50 for our individual scores, I gave this one a 15.
My total score was a 16.
Yep. So I think the theme is very boring. I hate morph decks. It's so bad.
It just didn't offer anything to the table. Taking the pieces out of it, like even like new cards and reprints, like unless you were already doing face down theming, like these cards don't have homes for you anywhere. It just it was a really bad deck. So we're not gonna
give this one new cards. I scored this one a 6 because Duskana is a very cool commander. It's just really unfortunate that it was printed in the morph deck. I keep saying I need to put a deck list for this together, but I keep talking about making a Naya Slivers deck with Duskana as the commander because most of the Slivers are base 2/2, even though they beef each other up and do other things. So having like Bear Mother Slivers, like Duskana is interesting to me, which is why I scored that one that was the highest ranking category for me for this deck.
I think did we not have somebody on our Discord as well? They were talking about Duskana with the Hair Apparent as well, which may have also been really sick.
These 2/2s and draw more 2/2s. Again, like it's a really cool commander that was printed in a horribly themed deck. So I scored that one 15. You scored that one 16. That is our
18. I'm sorry. Yeah, I was looking at the wrong thing. I scored that one at 18.
Makes sense.
But that's to set the bar. We don't have to talk much more about that, but that's to set the bar where our our low point was. So let's get started in our top 5 then. Starting at number 5 itself, releasing from Duskmourn, House of Horrors, scoring a grand total of 71 points, Jump Scare.
Yes. This was the Simic Landfall deck.
Yeah.
That, ironically, is also a face down theme deck. So maybe it's just morph that's the problem.
I think so. I think you talked about this super well in our episode where we covered all of this here. Turns out you can do face down matters really, really well when face down matters is not the theme.
Exactly. Manifest Dread is the best version of face down that they've done to date. It was a masterclass in how to do face down permanents. Because it has nothing to do with anything that's written on the cards. You don't have to remember that it costs 3. It comes down as a 2/2. Oh, this one is cloaked, so it has ward 2. This one is, this one has Megamorph, so when I flip it over, it's going to get a +1/+1 counter on it. Like, all of those mechanics are, I'm sorry, horrible. I hate them so much. Manifest Dread is like an ancillary card advantage engine that's on Zimone for this deck, where like, so landfall, you manifest Dread, and then if it's the second time you've landfall, you just get to flip a permanent over that you've manifest Dread. So every fetch land is just gonna get you in theory a permanent. You also get selection with manifest Dread, where you get to look at the top 2, one in the graveyard, one face down as a 2/2. it's just so much better. I can't begin to express how much better Manifest Dread is than every other morph variant that we've gotten.
Exactly. And to be a spoiler, this isn't going to be the last time a lands matter deck is going to be within our talking points for today. But yeah, this overall theme that it was trying to do of like you get just rewarded benefits for playing lands out of the just in general, you know? And what makes this one really, really fun as well. I was actually just looking on this as well. It's like, you know, this one was one of my higher scores as far as the fun factor is concerned because you and your opponents, you know, you're just never going to know what's going to be coming down as a 2/2, right? It's like as compared to a landfall creature that just makes you a token, you know, you're going to end up with the same token every single time you do the landfall trigger. But landfall, make a mystery 2/2 that then could potentially flip either on its own or with your commander, and it could be anything hiding under there. Like, that's great. It's so much fun.
Sick. I did have this one as a 7 on the fun scale, just because there are going to be games where you get the short end of the stick as far as variants, and you're going to end up like, oh, I'm drawing 2 lands, and now I put my land 2/2 into play. And so there will be some feel bads with this deck. I did have the replayability as a 10 on this one, though, because it's so varied. You're going to have like, oh my God, I flipped this thing, and then I flipped this thing, and then I won the game because of it. And then your next game is going to be, oh, I just went wide with 2/2s and was able to like win the game out from there. Like, so there's a ton of different avenues for how to win the game with this deck.
I very interestingly, like I found a couple very interesting points about this because of how our score ended up being. Each of us as well, we obviously tracked between each of our 50-point scores on which ones our individual top 5 are, and Jump Scare was in neither of those.
Yep.
So somehow collectively we had it just interesting enough that it's broken its way here into the bottom of the top 5, but each of us individually did not rank it higher than that. I also had this one as a relatively lower score for its new cards as well, for the same aspect that we were just talking about with what's that thing? Deadly Disguise. Is that just like some of the varieties of the new cards are specific for face down, and unfortunately that doesn't play them very well either.
Yeah, they're really symbiotic.
There was also from our episode, I just didn't like some of the other new cards that weren't face down specific as well. So again, that comes down to personal preferences really, but collectively, just because of the style of what it's trying to do, the theme that it plays out, and its overall kind of like random chance variability of you're going to do cool things sometimes and really fun land things other times, it has scored our number 5 slot for 2024. It's the
big guy casino.
Yeah.
Just spin those wheels. Well, so I'll take us into number 4 on our list.
All right.
Moving our way along nicely. Number 4 from the Fallout series, as mentioned earlier, is the Mutant Menace Precon. This was the Sultai Mutants deck. Let me pull up the deck list here. This was the Sultai Mutants deck with the Wise Mothman at the helm as the face commander. Obviously, this deck also included the Master, which is a significantly stronger commander. So, like, they just went absolutely hammy on this one. I thought that this deck was... I also am just a shill for the Mothman. Like, if you know me, you know that I'm completely and utterly obsessed and addicted to Mothman-related things. So the fact that they were giving me that, it also, like, man, when these decks came out, I just remember going, like, this is so rich. Like, they went deep on the flavor, but also were able to uphold the power level. This deck kind of goes crazy. So it's a self-mill, sort of mill your opponents. It was a super unique theme, which is, I think, where you and I scored it super high, is the rad counters. Rad counters with the I'll just read the Wise Mothman. So it's 1 black, green, and a blue for a 3/3 with flying. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, each player gets a rad counter. The rad counters are emblems? They're counters on your player.
Counters on a player similar to poison, yep.
Yes, exactly. So at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase?
Yes.
You mill cards equal to the number of rad counters that you have, and then for each non-land card that you mill, you remove a rad counter from yourself and take a damage. So,
correct.
Super cool. This is very cool. So you can proliferate those counters, you can stack those counters up higher, you can double them on players, and just make sure that they're milling themselves out and taking damage in the process. I felt like this was a very unique way to do a mill strategy. It also, like with the Master, who is, like I said, arguably the stronger of the two commanders, when he enters the battlefield, target player gets 2 rad counters. Most of the time you're giving them to yourself because he's a reanimator deck. So you can play rad counters and you can play this strategy in so many different directions that they just went berserk on this one.
That certainly was one of the coolest aspects about this deck, is that unlike traditional mill, it was utilizing pieces and themes and ideas within it that cared about anybody milling, right? Very, very Sir Conrad-y, like, where it's like, yes, you get benefits from milling yourself, but then you can also benefit on your pieces for having your opponents get milled out. And obviously taking damage that way, and as like non-lands or creatures or whatever gets milled. It was cool. It was very super unique. You got to play, you got to stay like proactive and offensive while also still keeping your opponents denied on resources.
Totally. I'm sorry. I forgot to mention what the score was for this one. We scored this one at a total combined score of 75. So for reference, Jump Scare was a 71 for us. Yeah. Mutant Menace was a 75. So these are all very close to each other. And they'll stay that way for a second, and then they start to kind of separate out a bit more.
Or start jumping up briefly here, yeah.
But yeah, so what's interesting, this is number 4 in our combined top 5 list. This was number 3 on my individual list.
And this one was number 5 for me.
Well, that kind of makes sense. If I had it number 3, you had it number 5, it landed at number 4.
Yeah. I think really my 2 biggest draws that wasn't making this deck any particular higher, and this one is probably real like petty and personal, but it just because this was a Universes Beyond. I'm not a Fallout fan. I mean, I know a little bit of it now, but like, honest to God, I gave a try at it. I tried Fallout 4, did not like it.
They're weird games. You have to really very weird. Like be into the Bethesda model of how RPGs work. And I also didn't finish New Vegas. You and I share this in common.
I'm so sorry to hear that too. I know people love New Vegas, and
maybe I'll give it another try sometime soon.
But. Yeah, and despite all of that, that is a draw when it comes to deciding a precon. Like what I had just talked about is like, this can be filled with all kinds of fantastic, fun new card designs. It can be filled with some of the best reprints, and like there were good reprints as well. I believe this deck had Guardian Project in it, and maybe Reanimate.
Has a Guardian Project. That's it.
Yeah,
that was basically the only of the. Like good. This is why this one ranked a bit lower for me, is that the reprint value was pretty trash. Outside of a Guardian, like one singular reprint over $5.
So
we also, this is interesting as well. We have the benefit of hindsight looking at these at the end of the year, where when the decks come out and we're talking, reviews, upgrade guides, we're talking about reprint value from prior to the decks being printed. So the fact that this has a Guardian Project in it that still is $10 is good, but there's none of the other reprints, like they all just got reprinted into the ground and just have basically no value anymore.
Yeah, the only real value draw to this for anybody would be to acquire the collective of the new cards that come in the deck.
Totally.
And that
which is why I gave this one a 10.
And yeah, that falls back on the point that I said as well, is that like, this is not going to be a draw for everybody. Like, I have no interest in buying a deck like this because I don't know Fallout.
Totally. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I think that this one sits in, I agree with our top 5 collectively, just to say that before we go any further into it. But I think this one sits in exactly the right spot, where it's like, it's definitely not the best deck that came out this year, but it is one of the better ones for sure. Like number 4 out of 24 is still a really good slot. That's probably, if you were to just ask me where this one would sit, I'd probably be like, yeah, it's somewhere in there, like up in the top 5 somewhere. Definitely not top 3 though, but up there. So this one, I think sits in a really great spot.
Yeah, which is really funny because as we go ahead and roll into number 3, 1, we're doing another Sultai deck, and 2, this one squeaked out above Mutant Menace by 1 point.
Yeah, we're at Simic deck, Sultai deck, Sultai deck.
Yeah. So number 3 coming in from the Outlaws of Thunder Junction Precons at 76 collective points, Grand Larceny.
Very, very nice.
Featured at the
my
helm
boy
with
Gonti.
Yeah, Gonti,
my Lord of
Canny
Luxury.
Inquisitor. Yeah. So showcased at the helm of Gonti, Canny Inquisitor, the Grand Larceny deck, a Sultai Theft. And I guess Play from Exile, I suppose, is also a blanket cover of this. But generally what Gonti was looking to do in this deck is obviously commit crimes by doing theft. Mm-hmm. So you are playing obviously his own ability and then cards that like stole cards off the top of opponent's library, stole from hands, stole from graveyard, stole from battlefield. Like it's just straight up theft.
Yeah, it's pure like burglary, the deck.
Mm-hmm. And that's so cool. It's like there's never really been a precon that does what this deck does ever before, really. There's been control decks and there's been graveyard reanimator decks, but not really like a combination of the things where your whole gameplay strategy is revolving around what do my opponents have.
Yes, for sure.
And that's so cool.
It's such a cool theme. Theme, replayability, and fun are basically all 10s for me on this deck. It's actually I've theme at 9, replayability at 10, and fun at 9 because
I'm very close on that too.
Every game that you sit down is going to be different because you're playing off the top of your opponent's libraries. You obviously will have the same kind of opening, same kind of setup where you're trying to get out a couple of evasive creatures, you're trying to get out Gonti, and then you're trying to swing. So that will be the same overall. But then from there, it's just you're playing with your opponent's decks. So what I love about this style of deck is that it scales based on the power level of the table that you're at. So you could be sitting at a lower powered table and the deck becomes lower powered. And if you sit at a higher power table, it's going to be higher powered as well because it's your opponent's decks. So it fluctuates that way and becomes nice and variable. And then there's weird things like maybe you're going to exile somebody's delayed blast fireball. And then you get this crazy story where you got this cast from exile off of somebody else's card. Like this deck creates really good stories and it's strong. It's very powerful.
It makes some very weird game interactions here.
For sure.
If we have to talk about as far as like negative connotations against something like this, theft can kind of be one of those ones that's up there as far as like maybe casual salt.
Oh, it's salty for sure.
Right?
This is like a salty deck.
It can be. It certainly can be. The like resource denying in and of itself can obviously sometimes be viewed, especially by newer players, as like, oh, well, if this is how the game operates, if this is how gameplays are going to happen, then I don't like this anymore, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so, proceed into this deck with caution, where it's like, if you end up playing this deck a lot and you come up against a group of people who just cannot stand the fact that you are taking it's not even so much like a removal problem, right? Like decks that do removal are totally fine like this, right? Like, oh, I lost my thing and now it's in the graveyard and now I can get it back. Oh, but with Gonti and Grand Larceny, no. You not only lost your thing, it is now under my control, killing you.
Exactly.
Right? Like,
yeah, it's like I put all of the cards in my deck for a reason. I don't want to see them across the table.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it is inherently going to cause some salt and cause some strife. But I think it's also not hard to beat. Like, it's a deck that's pretty swung around the commander sticking. So like, not to just be the play more removal guy, but like just if you take out Gonti and you can keep him off the table, he's already a 5-mana commander. So like you take care of him twice and all of a sudden it's 9 mana to get your Gonti back out to just draw a few cards off your opponent's decks. Like, this is why I love that there's things like Orin Frostfang in the deck as well, of like you playing all these evasive creatures, you're going to be hitting people every turn with your Triton Shore Thieves and things like that are just unblockable. So you have extra value in the deck. And your Felix 5 Boots is in the deck. That's a really great, it's probably my favorite of the new cards. That and the bandana, the Thieves bandana.
Oh, the Dream Thief bandana is sick.
fire. I know that you, as a Slicer player, enjoy that.
I don't actually have that. That'd be a very cool card for Slicer, actually.
Oh, you just like draw 3 cards on a turn cycle.
That's really cool. I should consider that.
Yeah, it's dope. So I think new cards was much better than the reprint value in this deck. I have my new cards sitting about a 6, and then reprint value is about a 5. There wasn't a ton
I was close to the same on that. Yeah.
That was just the Outlaws Precons, though. They did not go super ham on reprint value for those.
No, not really. I mean, there was lots of very cool legends in the Most Wanted Precon, but that whole theme was kind of a little whack in general. But
that was my lowest scored deck.
The Most Wanted, yeah.
Yes, it was Most Wanted. I think it's so boring.
Yeah, Grand Larceny was definitely the most interesting from those collective 4 as far as the precons are concerned. And again, yeah, like I said, it is such a unique idea of a theft precon. So
totally.
proceed into this one with caution, where obviously like it's a very, very good one to have if you're looking to have a sort of high variance gameplay, you know. Yes. You'll run into situations. The downsides here is obviously, like I said, is that theft can sometimes be viewed as salty, and then you'll obviously also run into situations sometimes where even if you are exiling cards from your opponent's library, sometimes some of them are just not useful to what you're trying to do.
Exactly. Yeah. If you're coming up against like a Goblin Kindred deck,
like, those are not going to do you any good.
You're going to get like a Goblin Lord for yourself. That's not going to be super useful. So that can lead to some feels bads. That's not a super fun way to be playing the game, where you're just spinning your wheels and flipping on other people's lands. But overall, very cool deck. Once again, forgot to mention, this was a combined score of 76 for us.
Yeah, I brought that up, that it was 1 point higher than the previous Sultai deck.
Nice. I'll just leave.
But would you like to talk about Would you like to talk about the next point jump though?
Let's do it. So from 76 in our third ranking, we jump up to our number 2 deck of the year with 82 points. So a jump of 6 points up from the Grand Larceny deck. This is our first Modern Horizons 3 precon. This is the Tricky Terrain deck. Another Simic deck, it seems. The Tricky Terrain deck is Omo, Queen of Vesuva. That puts everything counters onto lands that makes them all types of lands. So it makes them Urza's Tower, Power Plant, and Mine. It makes them gates. It makes them locusts. It makes them all these things. So you play each of your individual types of lands matters cards, and then you put everything counters to just boost all of them at the same time. It's like a Lord for lands, which I think is one of the coolest things that they've done in a long time. This was such a cool spin on lands matters decks.
I probably have a very bias towards this one as well, because this was the only precon I bought this year.
You're a Gates enjoyer.
I am a Gates enjoyer. This is the only precon I bought this year. This deck has my favorite new commander card released all year, the Sage of the Maze.
Yes.
Absolutely. I talked about this on our Discord channel. I actually have a brewery thread open for anybody who joins our Discord there. I have a thread open that includes all of the brand new cards that were released into Commander this year. And I talked about in that thread that Sage of the Maze, if you're in a Gate style strategy, it probably is now the best card in your deck now, probably other than Gond Gate. But just being able to essentially double up your mana production on gates and then turn your gates into threats as actual creatures when you need them to, and naturally untaps itself without restriction on how many times you can do that a turn. Busted. I as far as I'm aware, if I can remember,
it's Gaia's Cradle for gates.
Yep. That card is now in my Gates build personally, and I believe, don't quote me on this, but I believe every single time I've played that Gates deck now, if Sage of the Maze has been part of that game, I win. That just is a fact. To be
fair, your Gates deck is very strong to begin with.
It is, yes. It's very, very strong, but as far as my knowledge remembers, is anytime Sage has been a part of the formula of me going for the win, I win. Yeah, it's bananas. And then just going into the actual deck itself as well, I'm out of words. I don't have words for this. It's just it is so cool.
It's a masterpiece.
how do you make lands cool? Well, just simply do all the lands. Why bother, right? Do you want to have Tron on turn 3? Here you go.
Why not?
Would you like? You want to have a precon where you can do Dark Depths the hard way? Do it. I have multiple times.
Actually removing the ice counters with Dark Depth, 30 mana to make your team.
I've never been able to do something like that in Constructed. This precon, I've been able to do that in the precon as
it's so good. It's so nuts. Good. So I think this is one of the only places in our top 5 where you and I have really had a pretty big difference. I'm curious what your fun rating was for this deck.
Oh, for Tricky Terrain, I had this as a 9.
Okay, so I had this one as a 5. Just because, like, you're going to be largely doing the same thing where, like, you're just putting the everything counters and you're doing the gates thing and you're doing the locust thing. You're doing, whatever. So I do have this one pretty low as far as fun and replayability. Well, even replayability, I have it as an 8. This was my number 5 deck for the year, personally.
Interesting.
But if I was more interested in Lands Matters, I probably would have put it higher. This might have been my number 1 as well. Was this your number 1 deck for the year?
It was my number 2. It was my number 2.
We both have the same number 1.
I believe so, yes. But to talk about this, to be fair on it, right? Because we've talked negatives and pros about every single one of these. To be fair about this, and yes, your point applies very well. This deck is obviously just doing lands. And right, and if you draw the wrong set of lands, or you don't have enough protection pieces down in play, and especially I can't think of another precon throughout this year that relies so heavily on its commander being in play, because the key point about the everything counters is that they don't do anything if Omo isn't around. So if you don't have,
they do stick around on the permanents, but they don't mean anything until Omo's in play.
Yeah, so without Omo, this is a bad land ramp deck, right? Because it has pieces in it like there's the Uvenwild Hydra that goes and gets any land and is bigger equal to your lands. Okay, landfall decks play that anyway. There's a Rampaging Baloth, there's a Scoot Swarm, there's a Dryad of the Elysian Grove. All of these are fantastic land staples, don't get me wrong, but they're the exact same thing. And the new cards didn't really help with that either, considering that half of the new cards in this deck were also lands. So that's
Can I talk about my favorite new card from this deck?
Yeah, go for it.
Rampant Frogantua.
Oh, my froggy boy.
He's so weird. So it's a 3-mana 3/3 with trample. It's a frog. And it has this line of text, which is Rampant Frogantua gets +10/+10 for each player who's lost the game. And then it does some mill stuff and you get lands back. It's a whole thing. But to be able to just play a 3-mana 13/13 if somebody's lost, that's crazy. The reprint value for this deck is insane too.
Oh, this is
Dryad
a phenomenal.
Of the Elysian Grove, Apex Devastator, there's Mana Reflection, you've got Chromatic Lantern in the deck here. This was crazy. Not to mention all this was a new card, but the Talon Gates of Madara is currently, at time of recording, sitting at $18 still.
Nice.
That was one of the new cards for this deck. So you've got new value. This had a Yavimaya Cradle of Growth in it. This is a bonkers deck. Now, I think it's a premium precon. So this one was retailing for $80.
I was able to snag it at $60.
That's great. Yeah. So it probably was exactly. You're able to find it a bit cheaper, but God, I can't wait for MSRP to come back. That's such an exciting thing. It was pre-sailing and was retail selling for anywhere between $80 and $100 prior to release.
And it might be still one of those ones that's a little bit higher up there, right? Like we were all here for the debacle of the Modern Horizons ones, right? Like, and I think even still to this day, sealed Eldrazi Incursion is still like $120 or something like that.
For sure.
So that's obviously a big negative towards this as well, is that it was kind of very unavailable to the casual folk. But if you have the access to be able, actually, and you know what, probably we're time of recording, we're about mid-November. Probably by the time you see this, it's going, or listen to it, we're probably approaching in on Thanksgiving. Check in on Amazon for some Black Friday deals. You might be able to find some old precons at like 20% off plus free shipping, I imagine. Totally. So if you can hunt down any of these Modern Horizons ones, because they are now several months old at this point, wait around till about this Christmas season time. You might be able to snag these at a deal. And Tricky Terrain would probably be one of the best ones for that, if for nothing else, of that collective reprint value of some of Commander's best Simic lands, to be perfectly frank.
100%. Yeah, this is a great collection of good lands. I love it. This was a very fun one. I'm glad that they printed this deck, especially in and amongst the other the Modern Horizons 3 decks, which was like an energy deck, which no one cared about. An Eldrazi deck, which they already printed another Eldrazi deck this year,
and that no one could get their hands on, right?
Yeah, no one could get their hands on. And then what was the other one?
Graveyard Overdrive, actually, which is what I was going to talk about. Graveyard Overdrive has actually been the one that surprised me. If we can just talk about that one just briefly, if we're talking about the Modern Horizons one,
because leave some suspense for our number one.
Yeah, a little bit of suspense, but just real brief talking about that one. Like, in our original podcast review for that one, I was, and especially Jared was part of that as well. Both of us were kind of feeling really sour on that one specifically because it just kind of felt like jank graveyard deck. But having been on the receiving end, having been on the receiving end of both the pre-con and then the eventual upgraded one as well of Diesel the Restless as well, like that deck surprised me.
That deck is strong.
Yeah, and of the Modern Horizons ones, I know for a fact, actually, Graveyard Overdrive is actually selling for under its original MSRP price as well. So if you're, this is outside of our top 5, but if you are looking for a very surprising, cheap aggro graveyard deck, I would recommend finding Graveyard Overdrive. You will will not be disappointed with how it plays. It was super.
That one didn't rank super high for me on this list. I thought the theme was incredible, bringing like Lurgoyfs and like a largely like non-commander playable style, like Boomer Jund, like because I was playing Modern at the time when Tarmogoyf was a $200 card or $150 card or whatever. So like that was special to me, and I do love that they were able to bring that into Commander in a cool way. Everything else for the deck though is like the new cards is like Altar of the Goyf. I'm not putting that in any deck. Like the replayability, you're just going to do the same thing. You're going to mill yourself out. You're going to put Goyfs into play. You're going to make more Goyfs. It's super linear, as well as I do think it's a pretty fun deck. Like, that's pretty cool. That's a fun. I gave it like a 7 out of 10 for fun.
Yeah. Couldn't beat out Tricky Terrain, however, though. So Tricky Terrain takes our number 2.
That one ranked low because they didn't include Tarmogoyf in the deck.
Yeah, I know.
How dare you, Wizard?
It's not even an expensive card anymore. Just shove them in. Take our Tarmogoyf and put them somewhere else.
You're going to make a Tarmogoyf deck and not include Tarmogoyf? Get out of here.
Fail.
All right. Well, should we drum roll into our... Not actual drum roll. Should we head into our number 1? Our official, Thoughtcast official best precon of 202024.
Absolutely. Coming in
at 90 of 100.
90 points.
Yes. Big shock. It's another it's another green blue deck, but this time it's green blue white. It is the Peace Offering deck from Bloomburrow. Rabbits, group hug, silly flying, control-y, stacksy. Here have some cards.
Bumbleflower wins the day.
Oh my god, dude, this deck is an absolute masterpiece. So fun story is that, you know, Joseph and I both did our score sheets relatively separate from each other, only really skimming each other's work kind of essentially just before we started this recording session, more or less. He was a lot more generous with his 10s and 9s and things like that. I tried to stay kind of like neutral, reserved, giving every single deck a fair shot at all of the points collectively, not directly giving any one deck here or there like the absolute perfect marks. Peace Offering was the only one in my list that got a 10 for theme. Yep. This was one of the few that got a 10 for theme for me. It was this one, Tricky Terrain, and Eldrazi Incursion were the ones that got 10s for themes for me. But Peace Offering,
I also gave this one
basically across the board for me.
I gave this one a 10 in fun as well. Like those were my two Same. 10s that I did.
Yep.
And I think it goes without saying that just like out of the gate, obviously, firstly, step 1, a real honest to God group hug deck.
Yes,
that
they finally did it correctly.
It has a way to win.
Yes, because the only other time that they've done group hug, do you know which deck I'm going to talk about, John?
The 4-color deck, Kineos and Tiro of Meletis.
Oh, I was going to mention Zedru the Great-Hearted.
Oh no, that one was trying to like gift cards off to other people.
Again, though, this brings up the topic of group hug has always been so poorly defined that, like, when I say group hug, it doesn't mean the same thing to you. But yeah, they did it, and they did it in a way that is proactive, because that's always been when everyone's like, oh, I'm playing my group hug deck. And it's like, okay, you're just giving resources to all of my opponents for free. I'm going to take you out first. Like, this is my rule with a group hug deck. Is if someone sits down and is like, I'm playing a group hug deck, you're getting out first.
Yeah, because
no questions asked. Sure, you're giving me free stuff, but you're giving two of my opponents free stuff as well, and that means you got to go.
Group hug can kind of be viewed as king making, more or less. It's like 100%. You're not there to win. You're to just make sure that a particular opponent loses.
Right. Exactly. So the fact that they were able to do group hug in a way, I'll just read Mrs. Bumbleflower because it's such a good card. So it's 1 green, white, and a blue for a legendary rabbit citizen. It's a 1/5 with vigilance. Whenever you cast a spell, target opponent draws a card. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. It gains flying until the end of turn. If this is the second time this ability has resolved this turn, you draw 2 cards. What? Dude, this is crazy. It's just giving out cards left and right, drawing your own cards, and then putting counters and giving stuff flying at the low cost of, I don't know, playing the game. Like, it's so good. You can, like, even outside of the precons, I know that's what we're talking about today, but you can take Mrs. Bumbleflower in so many different directions, including just a straight up combo. Like, she goes crazy in combo decks where, like, you're casting spells. Oh, let's say you have an Isochron Scepter and a Dramatic Reversal. That's casting spells. You're just gonna draw your opponents out. Like, it's so innocent because it's this silly little rabbit. Also, like, 5 toughness is huge. This is so tough to deal with, and you're not gonna want to deal with it because the instant that you're in a position to deal with it, she's like, "How about you take a card? How about you just take a card right here? Don't worry about me. You just take a card." And
you're like, offer okay. You can't refuse? Nah. Counterspell? I'll draw 2 cards this turn.
Great. Love nice. That. Yeah, literally. Good in Counterspell Wars.
I'll counterspell. Oh, you're removing my thing. I'll counterspell your thing. I'll put another counter on Mana Gorger Hydra. Also grow it twice because we both just cast spells. Whoops, it's flying now.
Yes.
Smash.
Dude,
you know what I mean?
So good. And, like, okay, let's get back to talking about the precon itself. New cards, Mr. Foxglove. Crazy. Perch Protection, that has a line of text that says gift an extra turn. What is going on here, dude? They were on something when they made this. It goes absolutely crazy. And, like, dude, Bloodroot Apothecary in this deck.
Messed up.
It's messed up. It says treasures, how about not? How about you take poison for those?
Are you sacrificing clues? Now you're not.
Crazy. Take some poison.
Did you eat some food?
All the different ways that you can win in this deck. Oh, how are we going to talk about new cards and not talk about Tempt with bunnies?
It's amazing, dude.
Dude, it's so good.
I have been in games now that have, like, I've seen Tempt with bunnies played outside of this precon. It's like you were talking about that earlier. It's like you haven't seen new cards played outside of this. I've seen Tempt with bunnies.
No, this is the one that I have seen played outside of these precons.
I've seen people
upgrade their decks with these.
Right. And I've seen Bumbleflower just out of her precon as well. You know what I mean? Yes. So, like, that's a good marks of a precon is if you see the pieces everywhere else, then that's great.
Yep. Oh, it goes bananas, dude. Yeah, also, like, reprint value. Let's talk about, there's a Colonian Hydra in the deck. There's, like you said, there's an Offer You Can't Refuse in the deck. These are both $5 cards. There's Swiftfoot Boots, which somehow is still $4. Like, there's that Tameo Field Researcher that's reprinted with beautiful art of Tameo as a bunny. It goes so crazy. There's Lauren of the Third Path. Historically, in the last, like, 5 years, Lauren of the Third Path is my favorite card that's been printed. Yeah. So I love that they're just printing more of these. It was like $13 or $14, and it's still holding at like $6 for Lauren of the Third Path. So I love that they're reprinting things like that into it. This had a really good ramp package in it. There was Farseek in the deck. Like, dude, it's just built so well out of the box. It's tough to contest. There's a reason why it was you and I's individual number one picks that combined to make a score of 90 out of 100 for this year.
No joke. It was very close on that number one for me, for what that's worth. Peace Offering only scored 1 point higher than Tricky Terrain for me, but
that's fair.
Again, though, to be fair, though, like I said, both of us just, again, apart from each other, knowing about what we were ranking these as, just we each individually came to the same conclusion, more or less, that was like, oh yeah, this deck is absurd. This deck is bananas good.
Yes. And like the replayability on this is crazy. Like you're going to play a different game every time with Bumbleflower. Sometimes you're going to win on the control deck. Sometimes you're going to win on your alternate win cons, like the 20-toed toad that's in the deck. Sometimes you're going to slap 25 +1/+1 counters and give your Vigilance Rabbit flying. You're going to win on commander damage in this deck. Like, oh my God, there's about every single avenue to win the game in this deck. You could draw somebody out.
That's not even, and that's not even taking into account as well if you decide to play these sort of like, oh, let's make sure my opponents are smashing each other. How about I put a +1/+1 counter and flying on your creature, right?
Totally.
So now every game that you play with Bumbleflower is now going to be dependent on obviously what you're looking to do, but obviously what your opponents are playing as well, because you are fueling them, right?
Oh, yeah.
Bumbleflower draws them the cards too, so they get to do their strategy twice as hard. Middle of combat, I'll do this instant speed ramp spell middle of combat. By the way, this opponent that's now swinging at opponent number 3, your creature's now 1 point higher and flying. Now you're dead.
Right.
Like,
so cool.
What?
Not to mention, like, this is a scary deck to play against as well, because there's things like Illusionist's Gambit in the deck that's like, okay, maybe I do need to turn the tides and start attacking the Bumbleflower deck that's drawn 25 cards this turn. I'm gonna attack you. Oh, Illusionist's Gambit. Sorry, you're attacking somebody else now. Bananas, dude.
Yeah, easily the top deck of the year, without a question.
No contest. Even our combined scores, this was 8 points higher than number 2. That's like a huge gap between number 2 and number 1. It was kind of no contest for us. We've already said that our combined worst deck was Deadly Disguise. What was your least favorite deck this year?
Lowest for me was actually Animated Army.
Ooh, interesting. That one was one of my favorites this year. Animated Army. It didn't make my top 5, but I thought that the theme and the playability of it was very cool.
No, it just looked like a dumb girl pile to me, to be perfectly honest, right? Like the theme.
Wow, tell me how you really feel, Joe. This deck sucks. Move on.
No, I don't know. It just like it didn't offer anything like super interesting or new. Like I don't know. Bello is okay as a legendary, but like
one of these days, man, I'm gonna show up and I'm gonna have my Leylines deck together.
Your Bello Leyline. Yeah, I don't know. It didn't do it for me. But
yeah,
and yeah, yours was your worst was God, I'm blanking. Most Wanted.
Yeah. That was my lowest deck. That was a 2 for theme and a 1 for fun. Of like, come on, it's just another Legendary's treasure deck. Like, I do not need this. Also, like, the Angie Falconwrath is bad. Like,
yeah,
I've not seen this come up in any game once. And had decent reprint value in it. I give it a 6 for that, but everything else was 1s and 2s for that deck. Total score of 12 for me out of 50.
Yeah, and I obviously we briefly talked about earlier when we were talking about the Modern Horizons ones. For me of this year, the deck that was most surprising was Graveyard Overdrive. Did you have a deck like that? Something that on initial pass you gave a sort of meh impression of, and then it surprised you later on?
My number 2 deck this year was Eldrazi Incursion individually, which is not one that I would have expected to see. But just going through the deck list again, it kind of holds up. Like, Ulalek is a crazy commander that just takes over the game on its own. And I also like the theme of it, of being 5-color colorless, is just genius. Like, I think that was like, it was a beautiful, beautiful deck.
Yeah, I wasn't a crazy fan of that play pattern, but the real like harmony of being able to have these like colorless pain lands that help you give colored when you need it to be, like, that was a stellar choice of design. That was very well built. It was a very well built deck, even though it was just Eldrazi.
Exactly right. Walk me through your 1 through 5, and let's see how different it was than my 1 through 5. And also, it's very different outside of each of us having our individual number ones the same. I think we picked very different decks for our individual 1 through 5s.
Brief these real quick, and then we'll hit our wrap up here because we're rambling at this point. But for me, my number one we talked about was obviously Peace Offering. We don't have to go do that. I ranked it number 2 was Tricky Terrain, as I described, because that, again, a very personal bias aspect of that. Of it was the one deck I bought this year, it had my favorite cards this year, so that was a very obvious choice for me as well. My number 3 was Grand Larceny for the same reasons of, like, we already talked about in talking about our collective top 5 is like, oh, the theme is very unique, the style's very cool. I've played against the deck a lot, it's very, very fun. My number 4, as I was just saying, was the one that surprised me the most, which was the Graveyard Overdrive. I've really come around on that sort of theme, the style of it. My number 5 was the Mutant Menace as well. So nice. For me, my top 5 kind of lined up exactly more or less with our collective shared thoughts. Is like everything that we already talked about previously already applies just to my individual score.
Totally. Mine was wildly different. So at number 5, I had Tricky Terrain. At number 4, I had Quick Draw, which we didn't talk about, but that was the Stella Lee deck from Outlaws. Man, that deck was cool. That was just like a masterclass in Spellslinger to me. I thought it was so good. The reprint value was great. The new cards were super cool. Loved that one. At number 3, I had Mutant Menace. Number 2, I had Eldrazi Incursion, and at number 1 was Peace Offering. I was really surprised that Family Matters didn't make it onto my top 5. That was the Offspring deck from Bloomburrow.
Yeah, I really wanted to like that one more, to be honest.
It's really interesting and unique. I played against somebody who had just bought the Precon recently and was helping them upgrade it and found like really cool things like Sarah Ascendant for them for the deck of like it's a 1-mana 1/1 that is actually a 6/6 that you can just offspring and make like 12 flying power in the board. So like it's a really unique and cool way, and also has my Froggy Boy in it that I know you're still disparaging on. I can't remember the name of it.
What's Pollywog Prodigy?
Pollywog Prodigy. I know that you're one of these days I'll draw a card off.
Put it on record in this podcast that Joseph to this day has not drawn a card with Pollywog Prodigy.
0 card.
All right, so but funny. As we go to a wrap up for the year of Precons, what do you think? Have we had a good year?
I think that this was a worse year than last year for Precons, just across the board. I also like last year was the Doctor Who Precons, which really spoke to me. There was, there's just some great ones last year. But I mean, these ones are killer. Like looking back through the top 5 kind of made me like nostalgic for the year of like, man, we've talked about all of these on show. Like we've done upgrade guides and reviews for all of them. So maybe a little nostalgic.
Yeah, which alongside a link to this spreadsheet that we were talking about here, I'll have a link to a created playlist I'll put together of our Precons of 2024. If you're interested to view our individual reviews and upgrade guides for any of these decks, you can check that out in the links down below.
Love it. Yeah, and I think comment question of the day is, what was your favorite Precon this year? Do you agree with us? Was Peace Offering the best one? Did we get it totally wrong? Did we totally miss out on how good the Endless Punishment deck was? Like, what are you guys thinking? What Precons did you guys get this year? What was your favorites? So many questions to ask. Just let us know. We love replying to comments. I think that's about it for today. Feeling good about this episode, John?
Yeah, this has been so much fun, you know?
Oh, this was I love episodes that require us to do homework for them. So it was fun. Like I was on the way back from work yesterday and I was just sitting and like tallying all the different scores and everything. It was a very fun episode to prepare for.
Yeah, but overall, yeah, I think it's been a very decent year as far as the Precons are concerned, and we'd love to hear from all of you about what your thoughts are for the year. So be sure to comment down below on your particular thoughts on anything that you purchased this year, how we're wrong about our top 5, because we're just 2 idiots on the internet. So what is our opinion? What does our opinion matter? But be sure to drop us some likes and subscribes while you're down there as well. And if you would like to talk about some of these decks and the new cards that came out during this year, come hop over onto our Discord channel where we're having very fun and polite conversation all the time. about everything Magic, fun stuff, game nights. We play on stream sometimes and on our game room on Spell Table a bunch.
There's been a lot of food talk over on the Discord lately as well. All the homies have been cooking lately.
Yeah. That was me. Sorry.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and sign off. Thanks so much for watching. This has been the MTG Thoughtcast. I'm Joseph. That's John. We'll see you soon.